Camp was not fortified. The commander had decided it was unnecessary. The enemy, he believed, would not dare attack. He was wrong. On the 22nd of January, 1879, 20,000 Zulu warriors crested a ridge above a British camp at the base of a hill called Isandlwana. The British soldiers below had never seen anything like it. The warriors moved in silence. No drums, no warning. Just a dark mass spreading across the ridge like a shadow with no sun to cast it. The British had rifles. They had artillery. They had the most powerful military machine on earth behind them. None of it was enough. In 90 minutes, 1,300 British and Allied soldiers were dead. The camp was destroyed. The artillery was captured. The Queen's colors lay in the dirt. It was the single greatest defeat the British Army had ever suffered at the hands of an African force. The news reached London 6 days later. The Victorian world went silent. The empire that had never been beaten had just been beaten. And the question that followed across Africa, across Asia, across every territory flying a British flag was the same. If the British could be stopped here, where else could they be stopped? To understand Isandlwana, you must first understand what the British Empire believed about itself in 1879. It believed it was unstoppable. This was not arrogance without evidence. In the preceding century, Britain had built the largest empire in human history. It controlled 1/4 of the Earth's land surface. It governed 400 million people. Its navy ruled every ocean. Its army had fought on 6 continents and lost very few engagements. The empire had a theory about why this was so. The theory was not spoken aloud in polite company. It was simply assumed. The assumption was that certain peoples were meant to rule and certain peoples were meant to be ruled. The British placed themselves firmly in the first category. The Zulu, in their view, belonged to the second. The Zulu kingdom stood in the way of British ambitions in southern Africa. Britain wanted a confederation of southern African states under its control. The Zulu were not interested in confederation. They were not interested in British control. They had built something of their own, something that had taken decades to construct, something that the British commander in southern Africa, Lord Chelmsford, had fundamentally failed to understand. Southern Africa in the 1870s was a landscape of competing kingdoms and colonial powers. The Boer republics of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State had their own ambitions. The Xhosa, the Sotho, and the Swazi were navigating pressures from every direction. The British had recently annexed the Transvaal. They had done it without a fight. That ease had confirmed a suspicion. African resistance, they believed, would always collapse when faced with British determination. Into this landscape, Lord Chelmsford arrived with a plan. The plan was to invade the Zulu kingdom, defeat its army in a single decisive engagement, and install a compliant government. He expected the campaign to last weeks. He had not studied his enemy. He would pay for that failure in a way he could not have imagined. The Zulu army that faced the British at Isandlwana had not appeared by accident. It had been built over 50 years by a single act of genius. That genius belonged to a king named Shaka, who had inherited a small clan in the early years of the 19th century and transformed it into the most formidable fighting force in southern Africa. Shaka did not simply create an army. He created a system. The system began with the regiment. Every Zulu male was enrolled in a regiment at adolescence. The regiment trained together. It lived together. It was forbidden to marry until the king gave permission. Permission came only after the regiment had distinguished itself in battle. This created warriors who had spent years together. Men who trusted each other with an intimacy that no amount of drilling could manufacture. The weapon Shaka gave them was the short stabbing spear, the ikla. It replaced the long throwing spear that had been standard across the region. The throwing spear was a weapon of distance. The ikla was a weapon of contact. To use it, you had to get close. To get close, you had to be fast. To be fast, you had to travel light. The Zulu army carried no supply wagons. Warriors carried their own food for 3 to 5 days. They could cover 50 to 60 kilometers per day on foot. No European army of the era could match that speed. The formation Shaka designed for them was called the chest and horns. The chest was the main body of warriors who fixed the enemy in place. The horns were two wings that curved around the flanks of the enemy simultaneously. The loins were a reserve held behind the chest. They waited until needed. The formation was designed to encircle and destroy, not merely to defeat. By 1879, Shaka was long dead. His successors had maintained the system. The king who faced the British was named Cetshwayo. He had ruled for 7 years. He was not a man who sought war. He had spent those 7 years trying to avoid exactly what was now happening. He had sent message after message to the British. He had offered concessions. He had asked for negotiation. The British had sent him an ultimatum with impossible conditions. They had given him 30 days to comply. The 30 days had expired on the 11th of January, 1879. Chelmsford's columns had crossed the Buffalo River the same day. Cetshwayo had not started this war. He would fight it anyway. He had no other choice. Lord Chelmsford divided his invasion force into 3 columns. The central column, which he commanded personally, crossed into Zulu territory at a drift called Rorke's Drift. He established a camp at the base of Isandlwana Hill on the 20th of January. The hill rose sharply behind the camp. The plain in front of it stretched wide and flat. To any experienced military eye, it was a vulnerable position. Standard British practice for a camp in hostile territory was to fortify it. The wagons would be drawn into a defensive circle called a laager. The laager could be defended by a fraction of the force, while the rest operated elsewhere. Chelmsford did not laager the camp. He had 2 reasons. The first was practical. Fortifying the camp would take time. He wanted to move quickly. He believed the Zulu would not attack a large British force directly. He believed they would disperse and wage a guerrilla campaign. Finding them was the problem he was focused on. Defending against them seemed secondary. The second reason was deeper. It was the assumption that had defined British colonial warfare for a generation. He simply did not believe the Zulu would attack. On the morning of the 22nd of January, Chelmsford took half his force out of the camp. He had received reports of Zulu activity to the south. He went to investigate. He left approximately 1,300 men to hold the camp. The men who remained were a mixture of British regular infantry, colonial volunteers, and native contingent troops. They were spread across a frontage of over a kilometer. The line was too thin. Any officer who understood the terrain could see it. The men who remained were not given orders to fortify. They were not told to draw the wagons into a defensive formation. They were told to hold the camp. No one told them what to hold it against. The Zulu army had been watching from the ridges for 2 days. 20,000 warriors. They had been assembled in a hidden valley called Ngwebeni, several kilometers to the northeast. They were waiting for the right moment. They had not yet decided to attack. The moment was chosen for them by accident. A British patrol stumbled upon the concealed Zulu force early on the morning of the 22nd. The warriors, fearing their position was compromised, rose and began to move. The moment had arrived, not because they chose it, because the British had found them. The Zulu army crested the Nkutu Plateau above the camp at approximately 11 in the morning. The British soldiers in the camp below saw them appear. The sight was unlike anything in the military experience of any man present. 20,000 warriors moving in formation across a ridgeline, the chest and horns taking shape in real time. The left horn began to move first. It curved to the east, swinging around the camp's right flank. The right horn moved simultaneously, curling west toward the camp's left. The chest advanced directly toward the front. The mathematics of the formation were simple and absolute. The camp was being surrounded. The British opened fire immediately. The Martini-Henry rifle was a powerful weapon. It fired a heavy caliber bullet with accuracy at 300 meters. The volleys were devastating at long range. Warriors fell in large numbers. The advance slowed. For a moment, it seemed as though the firepower might hold. That moment passed. The Zulu did not stop. They went to ground when the fire was heaviest. They used the terrain. The ravines and dongas cut across the plain gave them cover. They moved through them in rushes, closer, then closer still. There was another problem: the ammunition. The Martini-Henry rifle fired fast. The boxes of reserve ammunition were at the rear of the camp. The boxes were secured with screws. Opening them required tools. The soldiers at the front were running low. Runners went back for ammunition. The system slowed. At some point in the battle, the supply of ammunition began to fall behind the rate of fire. The exact reason has been debated for 140 years. What is certain is this. At the moment the Zulu reached close quarters, some British soldiers were firing their last rounds. The left horn reached the rear of the camp. The right horn closed on the other side. The chest hit the front line. The British formation, already stretched too thin, began to break. The line broke in the center first. When it broke, the encirclement became complete. The Zulu warriors who had been advancing now had targets on three sides. The British soldiers who tried to retreat found the horns already behind them. There was nowhere to go. What followed was not a battle. It was the end of a battle. The Zulu fought with the Ikwa at close range. They had trained for exactly this. The British soldiers fought with bayonets and rifle butts. Some fought well, some broke and ran. Running made no difference. The Zulu warriors could outrun any man carrying a rifle and 60 rounds of ammunition across broken ground. There was a moment when a small group of soldiers managed to break through the right horn. Perhaps 300 men escaped through a gap before it closed. They rode or ran for the Buffalo River 12 kilometers away. The warriors of the right horn pursued them. Many were overtaken on the road to the river. Others drowned attempting the crossing. A small number made it to the opposite bank. A very small number. In the camp itself, it was over in minutes. The warriors moved through the tents. They destroyed the supplies. They took the weapons. They captured 2 artillery pieces. They found the Queen's colors. By 1:30 in the afternoon, the camp was theirs. Chelmsford, still searching for the main Zulu force 12 kilometers to the south, received a message. The message said the camp had been taken. He did not believe it. He sent back a message asking for clarification. The clarification arrived. He turned his column around. He returned to the camp in the early evening. What he saw in the dying light would stay with him for the rest of his life. Over 1,300 men, dead among the wreckage of their tents and wagons, the artillery gone, the ammunition gone, the flags gone. Chelmsford ordered his men to bivouac among the bodies. There was nowhere else to go. He sat in the wreckage of his own assumptions. He had been wrong about everything. The question now was how to survive what came next. The night of the 22nd of January was one of the longest in British military history. The survivors at Rorke's Drift knew the Zulu army was somewhere in the darkness. They did not know where. A small garrison of 150 men held a mission station at the drift. It was their supply depot, their hospital, their only shelter. When the survivors from Isandlwana began arriving with news of the disaster, the garrison faced a choice: retreat or defend. 2 officers made the decision. They chose to defend. They had no good reason to believe they could succeed. They had every reason to believe they would not. The Zulu force that attacked Rorke's Drift that night numbered around 4,000 warriors. It was a regiment that had not fought at Isandlwana. They were hungry for action. They were fresh. They hit the mission station just after dark. The British defenders had spent the hours since sunset building barricades from mealie bags and biscuit boxes. They fought through the night. The thatch of the hospital roof caught fire. Wounded men inside had to be moved through rooms occupied by Zulu warriors. Soldiers broke through internal walls with pickaxes to reach them. At some point before dawn, the Zulu attack slowed. By dawn, they had stopped. The garrison had held. 11 Victoria Crosses were awarded for the defense of Rorke's Drift. More Victoria Crosses than for any single engagement in British history before or since. The defense was real. The bravery was genuine. Yet there was something else happening in London when the news arrived. The disaster at Isandlwana needed a counter-narrative. The heroism at Rorke's Drift provided one. The Empire's attention was directed toward the victory, away from the defeat, away from the 1,300 dead men on the plain below Isandlwana, away from the questions about why they had been left without fortifications, away from the questions about the ammunition, away from the questions about Chelmsford. Chelmsford was never court-martialed. He was allowed to return to South Africa and complete the campaign. He defeated the Zulu at the Battle of Ulundi in July of 1879. He burned Cetshwayo's royal homestead to the ground. He captured Cetshwayo 3 months later. The war was over. Britain had won. The fact of Isandlwana did not go away. News of Isandlwana reached London on the 11th of February, 1879. It arrived by telegraph. The speed was new. A generation earlier, news from southern Africa took weeks by ship. Now it took days. The Victorian public read the reports over breakfast. The reaction was not what the government expected. There was grief, there was anger, there was something else. Something the government found more difficult to manage than grief or anger. There was doubt. The myth of British invincibility was not simply propaganda. It was a functional tool of empire. Millions of people across dozens of territories accepted British rule in part because resistance seemed futile. The British always won. Everyone knew that. Isandlwana said something different. The telegraph carried the news of Isandlwana across the world at the same speed it reached. London. In India, colonial officials watched the reaction of the local press carefully. In West Africa, in the Caribbean, in Canada, in Australia, the story was read and discussed. The specific details mattered less than the headline. 20,000 warriors without firearms had destroyed a British force in 90 minutes. The soldiers who read that were not all British. Many of them were colonial troops serving under British command. They read it too. The British government moved quickly to control the narrative. Chelmsford was quietly blamed in private. He was publicly supported. The heroism of Rorke's Drift was elevated to national myth within weeks. A painting of the battle was commissioned. It was displayed prominently. The empire needed a victory to look at. It had one. Yet the seed had been planted. It could not be unplanted. What travels fastest is not armies, it is not even ideas. It is the knowledge that something believed to be impossible has been done. The Zulu dead at Isandlwana were never accurately counted. Estimates range from 1,000 to 3,000 warriors. They were buried in the dongas and ravines where they fell, or they were not buried at all. The British dead were left on the field for months. The army did not return to bury them until May of 1879. By then, the bodies were skeletal. They were buried where they lay. The graves can still be found today. White cairns scattered across the plain below the hill. Each one marks a spot where a man died who had been told the enemy would not attack. Cetshwayo was captured and exiled to Cape Town. He was later allowed to travel to London. He met Queen Victoria. He appealed for his kingdom to be restored. He was eventually reinstated as a nominal ruler over a fraction of his territory. He died in 1884. The Zulu kingdom he had led was partitioned into 13 chieftaincies under British supervision. It was never again independent. The warriors who had fought at Isandlwana returned to their homesteads. They had won the battle. Their kingdom had lost the war. The regiment commanders, who had executed the chest and horns formation with such precision, disbanded back into the civilian life they had known before the war. They were farmers, they were herdsmen, they were fathers. They had defeated the British army in the field. Within a year, their kingdom was gone. No one who fought at Isandlwana was ever tried. No one was ever honored by name in a British official record. The men who held the line on the plain that morning exist today only in the casualty lists of the army they defeated. The British won the Anglo-Zulu War. That is the official record. Yet Isandlwana did something that no British victory could undo. It proved something. Not to the British government, not to the colonial administrators, to everyone else. The proof was simple and specific and devastating in its implications. A disciplined African army, fighting on its own terrain, using its own tactics, could destroy a British force in open battle. The myth of inherent European military superiority was not a myth that survived the 22nd of January 1879, intact. The impact was slow. It did not produce immediate revolution. It did not immediately change the map of Africa. In the short term, Britain simply reinforced its position and pressed on. Yet the seed planted at Isandlwana grew in unexpected soil. It grew in the accounts that traveled by telegraph to newspapers across the colonized world. It grew in the oral traditions of the Zulu people, who named the battle and remembered it precisely. It grew in the minds of military planners in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in West Africa, who studied what the Zulu had done and asked how it might be applied. Isandlwana did not end colonialism. It cracked the psychological foundation on which colonialism rested. That crack widened over the next 80 years through the resistance movements and independence struggles that eventually dismantled the British Empire piece by piece. The warriors who crested the ridge at Isandlwana on a January morning did not know they were planting a seed. They were defending their kingdom. They were following their king. They were executing a tactical formation designed by a man who had died 50 years before them. They won a battle. Their kingdom fell anyway. Yet something else survived, the knowledge that it had happened. The knowledge traveled faster than any army. It traveled at the speed of a telegraph wire. It arrived everywhere at once. And what it said, in every language it was read in, was this: the Europeans could be beaten. The proof was in the plain below a hill called Isandlwana. The white cairns are still there. They have not moved. History subscribed to them the moment the first warrior crested that ridge. If this story changed how you see the world the British Empire built and how it ended, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we find the stories that rewrote history, and then were buried beneath it. The next one is waiting,